Welcome to Flag Circle on Nimitz Hill. This is a small military housing area with a big history. After 31 months of occupation by the Imperial Japanese Army, from 11 to 13 June 1944, nearby carrier-based aircraft and land-based bombers from the Marshall Islands bombarded Japanese ships in and around Guam and Army positions on Guam. This was followed by a massive naval bombardment beginning on 27 June 1944, which continued through the invasion nearly a month later. This massive bombardment destroyed most of the structures on Guam and burned away much of the vegetation, especially near the coast. 247 ships participated in the operation to reclaim the island of Guam. In addition to the transport and amphibious ships, our Navy brought to the waters off of Guam 15 aircraft carriers, 7 battleships, 20 cruisers, and 67 destroyers. By comparison, in the same month, the invasion of Normandy was taking place in Europe, but with no aircraft carriers, only 3 battleships, 3 cruisers, and 34 destroyers. Following the Battle of Saipan from 15 June to 9 July 1944, the U.S. invasion force for Guam, codenamed Operation Forager, was finally ready. From 14 to 17 July, underwater demolition teams, or UDTs, the Navy's forerunners to the U.S. Navy SEALs, did reconnaissance of the beaches and demolished more than 1,000 obstacles placed by the Japanese. On 21 July 1944, American forces landed on each side of Arodi Peninsula to cut off the main Japanese base from the rest of Guam. The Marine 1st Provisional Brigade came ashore to the south of the peninsula, and the 3rd Marine Division came ashore to the north at Assen Beach. The large flat area nearly 570 feet vertically lower than the Fonte Plateau, where Flag Circle is today. At the time, the Japanese had large gun emplacements they moved into positions along the ridge of the Fonte Plateau, including where Flag Circle is. They used these positions to rain down fire upon the Marines. On 23 July, the Army 77th Infantry Division landed at Agate Beach, further south on Guam. The Marines knew taking this key high ground terrain was necessary to seize control of the island. The Marines made 3 charges up the hill but were repelled by the Japanese defenders. Part of the assault was undertaken by Able Company, 1st Battalion, 3rd Marine Regiment, led by Captain Gary Bunchu. During the 3 frontal assaults up the nearly vertical terrain, 60% of the company was killed or wounded, including Captain Bunchu, who was killed in action during the 3rd attempt. With more than 800 Marines killed or wounded, the 3rd Marines could not make another attempt without reinforcements. Elements of the 15th Marines joined the remaining elements of the 3rd Marines to make another assault on the ridge, now named Bunchu Ridge, in honor of the bravery displayed by their company commander. The 4th attempt by the Marines was successful in reaching the top of the ridge and establishing a foothold on the plateau. The success was in part due to the Japanese forces retreating into the jungles and hills inland from the ridge. The Japanese planned to lure the Marines into a position where they could use their bonsai attack tactics to inflict maximum damage on the Marines without regard to their own Japanese losses. Twice the Japanese attacked the Marines, but the Marines withstood the assaults and held the ridge. Captain Lewis Wilson was among the Marines on the ridge who fought off the Japanese. Despite being wounded 3 times, Captain Wilson led his men and fiercely engaged the enemy over a 2-day period, including hand-to-hand combat. Due to the severity of his wounds, Captain Wilson was evacuated to Balboa Naval Hospital in San Diego and spent the remainder of the war in the United States. He was awarded the Medal of Honor for his actions in Guam and later went on to become the Commandant of the Marine Corps. As Commandant, he returned to Guam and placed a plaque at Flag Circle telling the saga of Bunchu Ridge. Significant fighting continued through the middle of August 1944, although there were skirmishes by small bands of Japanese for nearly a year later, and in fact one Japanese soldier hid in a cave and did not surrender until 1972. With fighting subsided in the area from mid-August 1944 through the end of the year, the Navy Seabees began a massive construction campaign on the Fonte Plateau. They built an enormous headquarters complex, including the senior officer quarters here at Flag Circle. In January 1945, Admiral Nimitz moved his headquarters from Hawaii to the newly constructed facilities on Guam, where the headquarters remained through the end of the war. The 7 houses built in Flag Circle were for the senior commanders and their immediate staff. Occupying the first house was a Marine General Larson, the commander of Marine forces on Guam. The second house was the residence of Admiral Carney, the Chief of Staff for Admiral Halsey. The third house was for Admiral Halsey. A small guest house sits between the third and fourth houses, and in the fourth house resided Admiral Nimitz. In the fifth house was Admiral McMorris, Admiral Nimitz's Chief of Staff, and in the sixth house was Admiral Sherman, Admiral Nimitz's Deputy Chief of Staff. Finally, in the seventh house resided Admiral Spruance. Each house is essentially the same, with rooms surrounding a central courtyard. However, Nimitz's house did have a larger entertaining area. The houses were originally built out of wood, but twice destroyed by typhoons. The houses were eventually rebuilt out of steel-reinforced concrete, but on the same footprint as the originals. The basketball and tennis courts in the middle of the circle survived the typhoons. The Nimitz house has served as the residence of the commander of Naval Forces Marianas from Admiral Nimitz through today. 3 presidents have stayed at the house, and many official events have been hosted here over the decades. Thank you for your visit to Nimitz Hill, Flag Circle, and thank you for your interest in this part of our naval history.